Hello everyone. This video is not going to be one of my usual chalice diving episodes. There will be more of those to come. Don't worry about that. But this episode is going to be a bit different. Today is the 10-year anniversary of Bloodborne's North American release, and I really wanted to do something special to celebrate that. I gave a lot of thought to what exactly I wanted to do, but I was really struggling to think about my final decision. I thought of doing a different part of the game instead, like maybe just full playthrough of the main game and DLC. Then I thought about maybe doing 3 dungeons in one video instead of the usual 1, and maybe doing just one of each of the Fetid Rotted Cursed dungeons, or one of each of the Sinister dungeons, or something like that. Then I thought about maybe doing a Bloodborne week type of affair, where I just put out a new Chalice Dive video every day for like 7 days in a row or whatever. But none of those really stood out to me. They just didn't feel right, they didn't resonate with me, and it wasn't clicking for me. Then I had this very grand idea where I would be doing 1 or 2 Chalice Dive videos and then cutting back and forth between that to me talking to the camera, and I would be going over my experience with the game, and there would be gameplay of me reenacting my first playthrough, and it would just be this huge gargantuan video, and I would just do all sorts of special things with it to try and make it really stand out and become just this fantastic experience. And I really liked the idea in particular. I really liked it. I wanted to make it happen, and I was trying. I was working on it. It was getting to the point where I was not sleeping because I was trying to put so much time and effort into this. But unfortunately, I started to very quickly realize that it was just not feasible. And it was mainly my own fault, because not that I procrastinated or anything, it's just I took too long to decide what exactly I wanted to do, and because of that, I just didn't have enough time to make what exactly I wanted to make, and also, of course, get it out by the date that I wanted. So sadly, decisions had to be made, ideas had to be cut. So what I decided to do, after giving it, again, a lot of thought, was go with the more personal and close to the heart aspect for me. So instead of the usual content for this video, where I'm running through dungeons, commenting on just what's going on around me, probably screaming about a labyrinth madman or blood liquor, and making a complete fool of myself, instead I'm just going to be talking to you guys about the game. It's going to be my complete experience from the time that I learned about the game, through my first few playthroughs of it, getting the platinum trophy in the game, my favorite aspects, what I'm doing with the game now, all these years later, and essentially how Bloodborne over the years has become, hands down and without question, my favorite game of all time. Now let me tell you right out the gate, this is going to be a very long affair. There's a lot to talk about for me. So what I'm going to do, just to make it a little easier to digest, is I'm going to be breaking it up into 2 parts. The first part, this part that you're watching right now, is going to be the history section. It's going to be, again, how I started the game, all the way through what I'm doing with it now. Part 2 is going to be a different subject, and hopefully, God willing, that will be out in a few days' time. As soon as it's available, there will be a link in the description below. So if we're ready, then go ahead and strap in, because we've got a lot of ground to cover here. I hope you guys enjoy this. Let's get to it. So before I start going through my history with Bloodborne, I want to make something kind of known about myself. I have a strong tendency to fixate on things. And what I mean by that in particular is I will find something like a new hobby or an interest, just something that I will become very interested in. I'll be just really enjoying it, and I'll lock onto it, and that will be all that I can do for a while. And sometimes it will be, something that lasts for days, weeks, even months at a time, where that is all I'll want to do all day, every day, without exception. And there will be times when I'll get so fixated on whatever it is that I'll actually need to be peer pressured to stop, just to take a break, to eat, to sleep. And it can be a little bit of, not a serious problem, but a little bit of a problem from time to time. But then eventually, as tends to happen, I'll get burnt out on whatever it was, and one of two things will happen from there. Either I will immediately lock on to something else that will be my new fixation, and the cycle will just rinse and repeat, or I'll go stagnant for a while and pretty much just be chronically bored until another fixation rolls into the picture. There's something psychological there, I just don't know what it is, and in the end, does it really matter? But either way, the reason that I'm saying this is because in late 2014, early 2015, that fixation for me was video games. And this fixation was hitting hard. Like, this was one of the hardest lock-ons that I had had in a very long time. I was buying new games, I was buying new consoles, and I was just testing them out. And the ones that I liked, I would go ahead and just keep and hold on to. And the ones I didn't, I would either trade in or just resell it to a secondhand shop. Like, if you live in the Midwest like I do, you'll probably know V-Stock and Slackers. I was frequenting those places, but I would trade in or resell to get something different. And on top of that, I was also watching a lot of different YouTube channels about gaming. Like, some of them, for instance, were Let's Play channels like PewDiePie back in the day. But way more than that, I was really watching a lot of the gaming showcase or review channels. I remember some of my favorites were Pro Jared, Guru Larry, Tennings, Kadikarus. But there was one in particular who I really liked. This person really stood out to me and became my favorite YouTube channel to watch. I was watching their content all the time. Now, sadly, this particular YouTuber has chosen, for their own personal reasons, to kind of separate from social media. Can't blame them at all. I completely understand. So I'm not going to give their name or anything out of sheer respect. I don't want to call any unwanted attention to them. Just let it be known that I got a great deal of enjoyment out of watching this person's content. But back to the point, this YouTuber made a video that mentioned and briefly talked about Demon Souls. This was the first that I had really heard about any sort of FromSoftware game. Like, I had technically heard the name Dark Souls, and of course there were the memes of, it's the Dark Souls of insert franchise or game genre here. But before this YouTube video, that was really the extent that I knew of them, and I didn't even know the name FromSoft from that. So seeing a snippet of Demon Souls that this YouTuber was showing, it piqued my interest a bit. The game, at least at the time, looked very pretty to me, and I was intrigued by the gameplay style that was shown. I was also somewhat curious about how this person was saying the game was so hard. I knew of hard games from the past because, I grew up in the 90s when video games were very often challenging, even if they weren't intentionally made to be that way, they still were. Games such as Rayman, the original Pokemon Red and Blue, or Green if you lived in Japan, Crash Bandicoot, games like that. But Demon's Souls seemed a little bit different from those to me. It seemed like the one that was intentionally outright made to be a challenge. And I wanted to try that. I wanted to give it a fair shot. Now, conveniently, not too long before this, I had actually traded in my Xbox 360 that I had for a PS3. No disrespect to Xbox. I know a lot of people really like Xbox games and prefer Xbox over PlayStation. I got that. But it just wasn't as much for me. There weren't very many games on the 360 that I really was that into, really stuck with me. Actually, the only games that I was really frequenting on the 360 were Guitar Hero 3 and Rock Band. And I had tried several other games on it, but they just weren't doing it for me. I wasn't enjoying them, I wasn't into them, I wasn't good at them. Whatever it was, it wasn't for me. So I kind of wanted to get a PlayStation 3 and, in a sense, go back to my roots, I guess you could say. The original PlayStation was my first console that I ever really actually played, but that's a topic for another time. So I went ahead and I got myself a copy of Demon's Souls. I got it, I believe, if I remember correctly, from GameStop back in the day for a pretty decent price, if I remember. Back in those days, I did also have a friend who I had met in college. This person and I aren't friends anymore. Long story, don't really want to go into it. And I don't really want to put their name out there. So from this point onward, this individual in particular is going to be referred to as Former. At this time, Former and I were hanging out together a lot. Pretty much every day, just about. And since they were really into video games too, that was the main thing that we were doing together at that point. So I told them that I went ahead and got a new game called Demon's Souls, and we decided to go ahead and play it together. They came over that evening, and we started the game. We had no clue what we were doing here. We knew nothing about any of it. We ended up over the next week or two putting in, I want to say, somewhere around 20 hours. But it just wasn't really clicking with us. The main reason for that was how honestly relentless the game was. Like, it felt like a complete nightmare to us. Like I said, neither of us were experienced. We didn't know how FromSoft games worked. So we were going in completely unaware. And because of that, we were really just having a hard time getting into it. And we did try, but eventually we decided to, if nothing else, at least sideline it. So after we more or less gave up on Demon's Souls, we decided to give Dark Souls a try. We had learned that, it was made by the same people, and we had seen how many people were just absolutely praising the game. And we kind of figured that, game companies have a tendency to, as, a game series progresses, they kind of dumb it down a little bit and make it a little easier. Oh, what little we knew. So we figured we might have a little bit of a better feel for it, might have a little bit of a better experience. As it turned out, it was quite the opposite. We did not like the game at all. Sure, we had a little bit of a better idea of what to expect, but we were still pretty inept when it came to it. We both really disliked how slow and clunky the game felt. It was a complete trudge fest for both of us, and we were just not connecting with it at all. I want to say we put maybe around 2 hours into the game, but that was about the extent that we could go. We turned off the game and uninstalled it from my console, and I don't think it ever got reinstalled. So I had another friend who I knew from college, aside from Former, named Tyler. And Tyler was, conveniently, also a gamer. He and I were talking one day, and I mentioned that Former and I were trying out Demon Souls and Dark Souls, but they just weren't really doing it for us as much as I had hoped they would, because I had told him that I was going to try these games and I was really looking forward to it, and he had encouraged me. He had, if memory serves, tried them before. That was when he told me about this new game called Bloodborne. Funny enough, this was right around the time of the game's release. I want to say it was either right before the game dropped, or it was a few weeks after the game dropped. That's, of course, here in the US where I live. So it was a brand new concept. Tyler told me that it was made by the same developers as the other two games, that it had a similar gameplay system, so to speak, but it was much faster paced with a much different, and he even went so far as to outright say better, story. Now, Tyler and I were pretty good friends at the time. Sadly, we've kind of drifted apart because life just seems to have a knack for getting in the way of things. But back then he knew me pretty well. He knew that I had a deep-rooted attraction for London and the UK, and he also knew that I enjoyed things with a darker, gothic aesthetic. So he was very confident that I would enjoy the game, and he was really trying to sell me on it. I will admit, at the time, I was pretty skeptical. I mean, I had just tried 2 of the 3 games that this company had put out at the time, the only one that I hadn't tried then being Dark Souls 2, a game that I still have absolutely no interest in ever trying because of what I've seen and heard about it. And neither of the games that I had tried did anything for me, really. So I was a little worried that this new one that he was talking about, as different as he insisted that it was, would end up having a similar effect on me. But he seemed pretty adamant that I would like it, and eventually he convinced me. I agreed that I would get the game whenever I was able to get a PS4, which I did intend to get anyway, even before he told me about this game. So, like I said before, Tyler told me all of this right around the time that Bloodborne came out here. So suffice it to say, there was a lot of stuff being posted on YouTube and social media in general. It was a very hot topic at the time. I was seeing a lot of videos popping up with Let's Plays, with tutorials, and as time progressed a little bit, even some early lore ideas coming out. I was very tempted to look into it, to just kind of see a little bit more about the game, but something in me told me that it would be a very bad idea to do so. So I made a concerted effort. I really committed to not looking into any details. I didn't want to see any posts, I didn't want to see any videos, I didn't want to see any memes even at that point. I wanted to stay as blind as possible, aside from what Tyler had already kind of let slip a little bit. I held to that commitment for several months, and honestly, I think it might have been one of the best choices that I had made up to that point. I don't know if the game would have hit me quite as hard and had the same effect on me if I had looked into it, so I'm very glad that I held to my word on that. So November eventually rolls around. The holiday season comes to the forefront, and Black Friday sales hit the stores. I had been saving up money from my job at the time, and I decided that the time had come for me to invest in a PS4. I found a good price on one at V-Stock, one of the secondhand stores I mentioned earlier. It's a secondhand store for entertainment. They've got movies, books, music, tabletop games, card games, and of course video games. It was a used console, but it was in excellent condition, not a single problem with it, and so I got that, and I got a physical copy of Bloodborne, brand new and sealed. The purchase was finalized on November 23rd of 2015, the day before the Old Hunters DLC was released. I gave Former a call, told them that we had a new game to try, and that evening they came over. We got the console all booted up, installed the game, and we started to create our character. We had a little bit of a better understanding of FromSoft's character creation process and how they have the pretty much preset stats. We kind of had a vague understanding of that. So we decided to select the violent past for our character, because that was the highest strength level that you could start with. Something that we had also kind of caught on by that point to being at least a little bit of an upper hand. We designed our character, we named him Nathaniel. Don't ask me why we chose the name Nathaniel or how I remember that we chose the name Nathaniel. I couldn't tell you. Either way, we went ahead and designed him. That was kind of more my concern than Former's. And once I was satisfied with how the character looked, we went ahead and started the game. We started out in Central Yharnam, got our shit completely rocked by the first Scourge beast, like right out the gate. And we were taken to the Hunter's Dream. We knew that this was pretty much the FromSoft standard at this point, so we didn't feel bad. We didn't feel like we were doing poorly at the game. We selected our starter weapons. We saw the messengers on the staircase. We decided to go with the saw cleaver because it seemed like the more balanced of the three, and the hunter's pistol because from what we could gather, it had a harder hit to it. And we went back to the area and started for real. At first, we were doing okay, all things considered. We were carrying our own fairly well. That is until we got to the mob. We were getting decimated. Before this, we were both way more used to the just hack and slash beat 'em up type of games. In hindsight, that's probably also why we weren't doing well at the other games, Demon Souls and Dark Souls. So we were having a bit of a hard time grasping what you're supposed to do with games like this. We kept trying, we kept failing, we kept trying again, rinse and repeat for somewhere around an hour, give or take. We were getting so frustrated at that point, absolutely just fed up with dying over and over again. We were actually about this close to turning off the game, throwing the disc in the trash, and swearing off FromSoftware games. We were at our breaking point where we were about to just say, no, FromSoft games, not for us. We're not touching that. But then something clicked. Just something snapped in both of us. We had given up on Demon Souls, we'd given up on Dark Souls, and we were tired of these games getting the better of us. We felt that something had to give. We had something we had to prove at this point, and we were going to beat this game. But not only were we going to beat this game, we were going to beat it legitimately, fair and square, and we were going to beat it on our own. Completely blind. No hints, no walkthroughs, no help of any kind. With our new resolve, we kept trying. And we tried, and we tried, and we tried, and finally, a little while later, we got through the mob. We ended up figuring out the lure tactic, where we would throw a pebble or shoot at one of the enemies, bring them towards us away from the rest of the group, and we would just take them out one by one until the entire area was cleared. It took a while, but we did it. We got over our first hurdle, and that is where I feel our playthrough actually really began. When Former wasn't able to come over because of their job or just other things going on in their life, I was taking it upon myself to try and work ahead and prepare us for the next time they could come over. I was grinding through Central Yharnam to an obsessive extent. I am talking going through the map over and over again for literal hours at a time, memorizing routes to take, memorizing where all the enemies were. I was even taking notes. I had a notebook at the time. Sadly, I've lost it. But I was taking notes on which enemies were where, how many of each there were, how many blood echoes they gave you every time you killed them. And I was calculating how many blood echoes you could get from doing a full run through, excluding bosses, of course, and trying to figure out how many times I needed to clear the map, so to speak, before I could level up again. We had, by that point, accidentally initiated the Cleric Beast fight, but we hadn't beaten her yet. So we did have access to leveling up with the doll in the dream. So essentially, between our days when we could try to continue the story, I was taking on what I very lovingly refer to as the grind goblin role. Just repeatedly grinding at the game, like I said earlier, to the point where it was kind of a bit obsessive. I will be the first to admit it. And honestly, that grind goblin personality trait, so to speak, of mine, it's something that I've had for a long time, and I've actually grown very, very fond of it. I kind of appreciate that little trait of myself in a weird way, don't ask me. Anyway, time passed on, we continued trying, we continued just going through the game, and on the 8th of December, still of 2015, we defeated the Cleric Beast and got our first trophy. And it was at that moment that we were both officially hooked on the game. I can't speak for Former, I can't speak on their behalf, but for myself, it was a feeling that I had never experienced from a video game before. It was a solid sense of accomplishment, even of euphoria, I would say. And it was something that I needed to experience again. I needed that excitement. I needed that euphoria. So we continued on, and eventually we found our way to the second fight, the first required fight of Central Yharnam, Father Gascoigne. And he was our first true barrier. We tried several times, but he was destroying us. It was bad. We backtracked, we kept farming blood echoes, we kept leveling up, and eventually we stumbled across his daughter at the window. We had no idea what we were doing because, again, we were going into this completely blind, but we took her quest line, we said we would find her mother, and we were given the small music box. We leveled up a little bit more, and we decided to try Gascoigne again. It still took us several attempts, even after all of that. But eventually, he was bested. We beat him. So the first skill check in the game was beaten, and it felt great. We felt like we were really getting somewhere. But we had no idea what was still lying in wait for us. So we entered Odin Chapel, and we started exploring the Cathedral Ward. Initially, we were grabbing the hunter garb near the tree right outside the chapel door, and we were suddenly grabbed by an invisible force and killed. Needless to say, we were a bit taken aback. Continuing on and avoiding that area at all costs, we kept getting bested by the church servants. This was, of course, before we learned that they were complete parry magnets, and the church giants, which were terrifying at the time. On top of that, we were very confused as to where we needed to go exactly because we kept getting to this locked gate, or another locked gate in fact, and not knowing what to do. We didn't have the key, we didn't have any way to pull the lever, we didn't know what to do with it. We tried to figure it out for a while, but eventually we just kind of shrugged our shoulders and decided to try to find a different way. And that's when we found the path that would get us to Old Yharnam. Getting through Old Yharnam was honestly our first truly humbling experience. We had struggled at this point, but that was nothing compared to getting past Jura and his damn Gatling gun. I cannot tell you how many times we died to him. I can tell you, though, that when we weren't dying to Jura and his gun, we were dying to whatever else. Whether it was Jura's disciple, whether it was just the regular beast patients, whether it was the poison beast patients, whether it was the damn carrion crows, we were dying left, right, and center. It took us a substantial while to come across the blood-starved beast. I can't even tell you off the top of my head how long exactly. But when we did eventually find our way to her, we were nowhere near ready for her and what she was going to put us through. We were not used to enemies, particularly bosses, moving as fast or erratically as she did. I know, skill issue, but we paid for it. It took us a few weeks, but eventually, on the 28th of December, we were victorious. Blood-starved beast was no more. She was gone. With our winnings, we purchased the Hunter Chief emblem from the Messenger Bath, which we kind of figured putting 2 and 2 together would open the gates in Cathedral Ward, and we went ahead and gave it a shot. Sure enough, it opened the gates. We were able to find our way to Vicar Amelia, where we learned we were not ready yet. We tried a small handful of times, facing defeat in all of them, and on our way back to make another attempt, we noticed that there was a different pathway. So we decided to investigate that instead. So we got through this wooded area full to the brim with the gunmen and their hunting dogs, and we opened the gate to Hemwick Charnel Lane. By this point, we were fairly used to combat with regular enemies, and we were usually able to carry ourselves pretty well at this point. We still died occasionally, but it was nowhere near as bad as when we first started playing the game. What we weren't expecting, however, were the mad ones spawning up out of nowhere. We had obtained enough insight at this point to cause them to appear, but we didn't understand the concept of insight yet and what it causes to show up or not show up. So, bottom line, we didn't know that we could have just gotten rid of some of our insight and made it to where they just would stop appearing. Either way, we did make it through without too terribly much trouble. We died several times, but it wasn't unreasonable. And eventually we came across the Witch of Hemwick. Now, compared to the other bosses that we had taken on to this point, the Witch was pretty easy, all things considered. We did die once to her, which wasn't even to her, it was to the mad ones. But we took the witch out on our second attempt. The next few days we worked mainly on leveling up our character and weapons, somewhere along the way getting grabbed by a snatcher and taken to Hypogean jail. We were not able to get past the snatchers in the area, so we decided to just kind of backburner it, put it on hold for the time being. After some more grinding, we decided to go ahead and try Vicar Amelia again, and on New Year's Day of 2016, she was no more. We went ahead and lit the lamp, we inspected the skull glowing on the altar, watched the cutscene of 2 people who we had no idea who they were, and carried on to the doorway that we had previously stumbled on asking for a password to see if it was now open. Sure enough, it was. We used the phrase, and the door opened, giving us entry to the Forbidden Woods. By now we were starting to feel a little bit more confident in ourselves, skill-wise. This would be quickly put in its place by the Forbidden Woods. We were continuously getting lost. We kept having to use our bold hunter's marks just to go back to familiar territory. We did eventually find our way to the path back to Central Yarnum. We did find the back entrance to Yosefka's clinic, and we did obtain the Canehurst summons. But it took us a few weeks to find our way to the boss of the Forbidden Woods, the Shadow of Yarnum. Somewhere along the way, I believe it was the 21st of January, I decided that this game was good enough to warrant the purchase of the Old Hunters DLC. It was only $20, not too steep of a price, and I had really decided that I wanted the full experience of this game. So the transaction went through, and the content was added to my library. When I loaded back into the game, there was an item on the stairs in the Hunter's Dream called the Eye of the Blood-Drunk Hunter. I figured that it had something to do with the DLC, but I had no idea what. So, not knowing what to do with it, I set it aside for the time being. I just disregarded it. So Former and I continued working on finding our way to the Shadow of Yarnum. And eventually we did, but unfortunately, when we did find them, we had not found the second elevator shortcut, which made the fact that we kept dying to the shadows very frustrating. But with perseverance, after couldn't even tell you how many attempts, the Shadow of Yharnam was defeated on the 5th of February. We went through the gate, got the shit scared out of us by the first Garden of Eyes encounter, lit the lamp to Bergenworth, and tried to keep going onward. After being completely destroyed by the hunter at the top of the stairs, we decided to backtrack a little bit. We were still pretty burnt out from the headache that was the Forbidden Woods, so we decided to go back to Cathedral Ward and noticed that there was this new doorway that wasn't there before. We decided to explore it and went up the tower in the Healing Church workshop. We got to the dead-end door at the top of it and realized that we couldn't really do anything, so we went ahead and went back down. And we dropped off the ledge, not really knowing where we were going, but we went into the dark area with all the, wooden bridges going across. I don't remember whether it was Former that had the controller at the time or whether it was me that did. But whoever it was made a very important discovery by complete accident. Whichever one of us it was went through the door and accidentally bumped the circle button, making our character roll off to the left. Now, I don't know how we got so fortunate that day. Honestly, we probably should have taken it as a sign to go to Vegas. But instead of plummeting to our death, we landed on a platform with another platform just below us. Not really thinking anything of it, we went ahead and dropped down to the next platform and saw a door. We opened it, walked through the pathway, and suddenly got some insight out of nowhere. And then we got a trophy saying that we discovered the abandoned old workshop. We didn't really know what it meant, we didn't know the relevance to the story, and we weren't really concerned with it at the time. We just went ahead and grabbed the items on the map, lit the lamp, and went back to the dream, not even continuing down the original path we were trying to go on. The next couple of days were dedicated exclusively to the grind. We were leveling up our character as much as we possibly could. We were repeatedly going through Hemwick Charnel Lane and even some of the earlier parts of the Forbidden Woods that we had kind of figured out our way around at that point. We had really in the end decided that Central Yharnam was just too easy at that point. Eventually, after leveling up a few times, we finally, with much struggle and frustration, got past Yuri and got the Linarium key. We opened the door and saw an old man sitting in a rocking chair. We talked to him and he pointed at the ledge that he was facing, and still frustrated from fighting and taking out Yuri, Former proceeded to beat the piss out of this poor bastard sitting in front of us, and we got the Tier 2 Irune for it. Name another game where you can get rewarded for beating up an old man. We took interest in the gesture that he made, pointing his cane to the ledge. We saw several notes around the edge of the drop-off saying to take a step forward, and we, not seeing anything else to do, decided to trust them. We landed in the Moonside Lake, saw Rom minding her own business, and for some reason took offense to it, and we attacked her. Mistakes were made that day. For the next couple of days, we kept trying, just going to fight her, getting our shit rocked, grinding some more, trying again. The process was in a complete loop at that point. But with much determination and even more so spite, we killed Rom on the 9th of February. We saw a particularly pale lady appear, ran up to her, initiated a cutscene, and ended up in a very strange position in a circular room with this giant monstrosity of a creature just looming menacingly over us. Unsure of what else to do, we went through the doorway in front of us, and we ended up in Yahar Ghul, Unseen Village. The fatigue was starting to kick in at this point. Former and I both very much so wanted to continue the game, to hold to our resolve and beat it, but we were struggling by now to find the motivation. We were getting more and more frustrated with the difficulty curve, and that was being made even worse in this new area. We were constantly getting killed by enemies, getting lost and having to backtrack, getting hit by Amygdala's laser attack. So we decided to take a break from Yahar'gul and try to level up some more. We went back to the cathedral ward and saw another Amygdala on the side of the chapel. We remembered what had happened to us before, and we decided that we wanted to see if that was what was grabbing us that first time around. So we went back under the tree and confirmed that, sure enough, she was. But what we didn't know was that the result this time would be far different from the very first encounter. Instead of dying, a cutscene played. And when the cutscene was over, we were at a new lamp in this place called the Hunter's Nightmare. Curiosity got the better of us, as it tends to do, and we went up the staircase, coming face to face with a hunter carrying a weapon that we had not seen before. Not thinking a whole lot of it, as we had encountered a couple of hunters at this point in the game, we made an attempt to fight him, thinking he probably wouldn't be too bad, and we were promptly killed. We spawned back at the lamp and decided to go up the hill next to the staircase instead because it looked like it might have gone to a different area. And we were met with another hunter with the same exact weapon as well as the same exact fate. So once more we decided to take a break from this area and go back to, shall we say, more familiar territory. We did a bit more grinding and leveling up, but we were starting to also notice that it was getting harder to do that because of the cost increase. So we decided to try again in Yahar'gul in the hopes that we could maybe farm enough blood echoes there to actually get us where we needed to be level-wise. Slowly but surely, we were learning the map, able to advance onward without getting completely lost, and we even figured out how to evade Amygdala's laser attack, hugging the left side of the staircase and running for dear life. We lit the next lamp and continued on, defeating the enemies that were in our path, and we opened the door to the building. We recognized the inside of the building as Hypogean Jail, and we honestly expected to see the Snatchers still there. But instead there was just one hunter in the middle of the room who didn't even look like he actually had a weapon. He just looked like he was standing there. So we figured we could probably handle him and decided to initiate battle. That's when we learned that there were, in fact, not one, not even two, but 3 hunters in that room, and we chose to run down the stairs to escape. Eventually, don't even ask me the order of the process here, because I couldn't tell you, but we found ourselves in this strange tunnel with a drop-off at the end, and we made our way down the path. Here we found Dark Beast Parl, and thankfully, we realized that she was not nearly as intimidating as she initially looked. On the 21st of February, we defeated her on our second try. After this, we made a few more attempts through Yahar'gul, but it was then that we made the final decision that we were a bit overdue for a break. Former and I took a little shy of 3 months away from the game. From time to time, in very short stints, I would grind for blood echoes and just try to make sure not to lose touch with the game, so to speak, but that was about the extent of it. Eventually, we decided it was time to get back to it, and on the 13th of July, we resumed our hunt. Former was getting used to the controls again in Hemwick Charnel Lane when they triggered the cutscene to gain access to Forsaken Castle Canehurst. We took it as a sign to start there, and honestly, in a little over an hour, we had not only made it to Martyr Ligarius, but we had defeated him after a small handful of tries. Feeling refreshed and encouraged by the victory, before even knowing how notoriously difficult Ligarius really is, for first-time players especially, we returned to Yahar'gul. We were able to best the 3 hunters, and eventually we reached the 1 reborn. We were not aware of the 6 Chime Maidens, as Former had accidentally skipped the cutscene. So, needless to say, this fight was unnecessarily difficult. But after several tries, as well as about a 5 or 6 hour break due to other obligations, one reborn was also defeated. We entered the building at the back of the arena, inspected the corpse in the chair, and were taken to the lecture building. We went through the upper level of the building and reached a door at the end of the hallway, opened it, and were transported to a new and particularly sinister, really, area that we later learned was called the Nightmare of Mensis. Following the path forward, we were caught off guard by a Loran Silverbeast, an enemy that we hadn't encountered yet in the game. And in the process of trying to get past him, we were caught even more off guard by the frenzy bar suddenly filling up very quickly and for no apparent reason. Something that we hadn't really experienced since the two church servants right before the fight with Vicar Amelia in the Grand Cathedral. So we reached the lamp, lit it as fast as we possibly could, and left the area. We were not having that at that time. From there we went back to the lecture building, as we assumed, seeing as there was a second floor, there must have been a first floor as well. And sure enough, we were right. There was. So we proceeded to go down the ladder, talk to Patches. I elected to kill him, and we searched the rest of the building. Eventually, we got to the other doorway at the far end of the first floor, went through that, and ended up in the Nightmare Frontier. Having no idea what we were getting ourselves into, we decided to proceed on and explore it. And not long after that, we faced our first invasion. Now, we had technically been playing online for quite a while at that point. I remember I first subscribed to PlayStation Plus on, I want to say it was late December of 2015, maybe like December 21st or something like that. But we had never done any sort of cooperative play because we didn't really know what to do with that. And two, we just didn't really feel a need to because, it was just the two of us playing. So, bottom line, we never experienced the Sinister Chime Maiden before. We didn't even know that invasions were actually a thing in the game. So, suffice it to say, we were very quickly defeated. And we took this as our cue to promptly leave the area because clearly we didn't know what the fuck we were doing. We decided to take a break from the main game and instead start looking into the Chalice dungeons, something that we meant to do earlier, but we had gotten sidetracked. So we went through the Thumeru and Central Thumeru dungeons with relative ease, given the fact that we were way over-leveled for those dungeons. And we even found the Hintertomb Chalice in one of the bonus rooms and decided to continue through there. You guys know where this is going, right? And that was going well enough until we encountered the first Labyrinth Madman. I remember I was the active player at that time, and I reached the lever room. I believe it was the first layer. I could be wrong, but I think it was the first layer, and it was the lever room. I saw this enemy guarding the lever, and I was a little concerned because the character looked like it was twitching. Now, I thought maybe it was just some weird graphical glitch, but I proceeded on kind of with caution. I walked instead of ran, not really knowing what to expect. And then in a split second, he went from standing there to charging forth Mach 10, screaming and flailing erratically. Throughout our time playing the game, there were many things that startled or even frightened me. I'm a bit of an anxious person, so not the hardest thing to do. But this was the first time that I outright panicked. I screamed at the top of my lungs. I don't even know how I didn't get in trouble for that, because I was living with my grandparents at the time. I was in their basement, and this happened around 2:30 in the morning. But anyway, I screamed, I threw the controller, literally threw it, and I ran out of the room. Former swooped in and grabbed the controller. I don't know if they were able to beat the enemy or if they died. I have no idea. I did not care. I couldn't have cared less. I was done for the night. We stopped the game there because I was so shaken up by it. The next few days, we decided to give the Hunter's Nightmare another try. I was not willing to go in the dungeons again. Neither of us were willing to go to the later areas in the game again. And it had been a little while since we had been to the Hunter's Nightmare last, and we had leveled up a fair amount. It was a very difficult run, but eventually we did get to the second lamp, though we missed a lot of stuff along the way, we would later learn. And from there, we began what was by far the hardest fight that we had encountered up to that point. Ludwig. This fight took us a few days to get through, with many attempts made and failed, some of which embarrassingly so. But we kept trying, we kept at it, and on the 19th of July, Ludwig was bested. We moved on to the research hall. We struggled with the 2 church hunters right before the lift, but eventually we got past them. Once we got to the actual research hall area and lit the lamp, we were very quickly shown just how bad this area was going to be. Between the patients repeatedly killing us, getting lost, falling off the staircases and platforms, and getting taken out by the hunter in the area, we became fed up. By this point, even with the few months break that we had taken, we were truly burnt out. The game was untouched by either of us for roughly 10.5 months after that. I don't think either of us really intended to stay away from it for that long, but there were just other things going on in our lives. It just prolonged our time away from the game. But eventually we were able to bring those matters to a close, and we felt that it was time to pick the controller back up, and this time we were dead set on beating the game. There was no giving up this time. We were going to finish the story if it fucking killed us at this point. Our first stop was the Nightmare Frontier. We remembered that area to be really fucking bad, and we wanted to get it out of the way as soon as possible. It was not easy. It was a nuisance. We kept getting lost, even worse so than any of the other areas. But with our newfound determination, we pressed on. We eventually felt our way through the most basic part of the map. We missed so many things along the way, more than I would care to admit. We came across our first winter lantern, a very close contender to the most terrifying thing in the game, and after a while, we reached Amygdala. There were 2 key issues with that. First, and most importantly, we did not have the bow blade at the time. We did not even know the bow blade existed yet. That was very unfortunate because, as I've said in a couple of my other videos here, Amygdala's weak point is her head. With the saw cleaver, the weapon that we were still using from the beginning of the game, it was extremely hard to hit her in the face. So instead, we were swinging at her legs, the part that takes absolutely no damage whatsoever. Her legs tank everything. This made the fight unbearably, excruciatingly long and difficult, and we died a lot. This leads to the second issue. In our trek through the area, we had not found the elevator shortcut. So you know what that means. Each time we died, we had to go through the entire map again. That included the one unavoidable winter lantern in a good run, when we remembered where to go. But then there were the bad runs, where we would end up taking some sort of a wrong turn and get shocked by at least one, if not both, of the other winter lanterns, thus at least doubling our chances to die on the way to the boss arena. But this time around, like I said, we were dead set. And finally, on the 5th of June 2017, we beat Amygdala. Everything in the Nightmare Frontier be damned. We got the Ailing Loran Chalice, learned that we could not use it because we didn't have the materials we needed for the ritual, and promptly disregarded it. We shrugged our shoulders and moved on. Next up was the Nightmare of Mensis. And this was when we realized that the 10.5 months we had taken away from the game was exactly what we needed. We blasted through that map at almost breakneck speed. We found the Chime Maiden before we could be invaded. We killed Edgar, the hunter on the bridge, on our first attempt. We got the shortcuts, we got the second lamp, and we got to the fight with Mikolash. We did all of this in about 10 minutes time. The fight with Mikolash, on the other hand, that was an entirely different story. At that time, we didn't know about the cheese. Getting him to second stage, having him go through the mirror or jump off the ledge, and then going into the room above where he was, and just using projectiles like poison knives or Molotovs to kill him from a distance. Or, alternatively, one tactic that I would learn and adopt as my preferred tactic, the Bowblade. So we were fighting him completely legitimately. That meant chasing him around, getting more and more annoyed by the second, only to eventually be lured into one of the big rooms and killed by either his ungodly powerful augur of Abritus on first stage, or if we made it to second stage by sheer dumb luck, getting just completely one-tapped by a call beyond. We were at this fight non-stop for just under an hour. But we were still working with an unbreakable will, and we finally killed Mikolash the way that FromSoft intended. By this point, we could tell that we were nearly at the end. We could just feel it. We carried on from the lamp following Mikolash's fight, and were on our way to the next boss. Then we got sidetracked by the broken cage elevator, somehow got extremely lucky and got into the secret hallway on our first or second try, and were terrified to see even more of the winter lanterns. If memory serves me, we just mad dashed through the area and somehow survived. Don't ask me how, I couldn't tell you even if I wanted to. We followed the path past the creepy nightmare apostles with the human heads, and we saw a lever. We pulled the lever, got greatly startled by the cutscene with the brain of Mensis, and we dropped down the hole in the floor. We got nearly killed by the winter lantern that was in that room. I was on the verge of a panic attack at that point, and narrowly escaped death through the doorway to the right. We collected all of the loot, and we saw an item in the room with the giant hole that the brain of Mensis had fallen into. We got back to full health, dropped down off the ledge, nearly fell to the same fate as the brain, and we obtained our first blood rock. Not having any idea where to go from there to get back where we needed to be, we bold hunter marked, and we respawned at the lamp. This time, instead of going right towards the broken cage elevator, we went left and followed the intended path towards the final boss. We got invaded not once, but twice. Died both times, and upon respawning, decided that we were stopping for absolutely nothing. We ran straight through. We did not stop to kill a single enemy. We evaded as many attacks as we could manage, and fortunately we got very lucky to not get invaded again, and we ended up standing in front of Queen Yharnam. We went up the elevator, we passed through the doorway, and we approached the baby carriage and saw the cutscene initiate. We were certain that this was going to be, without question, the hardest boss that we had faced in the game, in any game that we had ever touched. We saw Murgo's wet nurse drop down and pull out her blades, and we began to question if we were ready to take on this extremely intimidating, huge behemoth of a boss. And then we proceeded to kill her on our first try with genuinely minimal effort. I'm not kidding. we were waiting for the second part of the fight to start. Nightmare Slain came across our screen, a line of text that we had not yet seen at this point. We got the notification of the trophy we got, and even after that, we still stayed there in the arena, waiting for whatever was supposed to happen next. We genuinely could not accept that that was the end of the fight. This end game boss fight. But eventually, after, again, several minutes of just sitting there idle, waiting for something to happen, we accepted the disappointment and lit the lamp. We got back to the dream, and for a moment we were terrified because the dream was on fire. We talked to the concerningly relaxed doll, and she told us that Gehrman was waiting for us at the foot of the great tree. We walked around the dream looking for where this great tree was, and eventually came across the gate that had been closed throughout the entirety of the playthrough, now sitting open. We walked through it and saw Gehrman waiting for us at the top of the hill. We approached him and listened to what he had to say, and we were left with a choice: submit or refuse. Now, we had, to the best of our ability, held true to the no hints or walkthroughs rule throughout the entirety of this experience. But we had unintentionally stumbled across one little thing that mentioned the game had a total of 3 possible endings. We had not looked into what the 3 endings were, but we knew specifically that there were 3. We were a bit offended by Gehrman talking about killing us at this point, not quite understanding that it would have been more of a merciful fate, all things considered. So, blindly, without knowing what we were doing, we refused. Then a cutscene started. Our hearts sank. We felt similarly here as we did with the wet nurse. Were we actually ready for this? The fight started. I was the active player. I had the controller in my hand, and I was trying my hardest to convince myself that I was going to win. I was very quickly proven wrong. Gehrman took me out fast. We went through a handful of tries, dead set on finishing this. And finally, at 23:18, 11:18 p.m., still on the 5th of June, Gehrman fell. We received the Honoring Wishes trophy, and we completed our first Bloodborne playthrough with the bad ending. We had done it. We beat the game. To say that we were celebrating is an understatement. We were on the moon. In our excitement, we made a decision. We were not going to stop there. We were going to get all of the trophies and platinum the game starting the next day. We quit out of the game for the night, turned off the console, each had a couple of drinks because by God we deserved them, and Former was spending the night anyway, and claimed a more than well-deserved sleep. The next day, with a freshly restored passion for the game and exceptionally high morale, we laid out our plans. We elected to keep the original character file to get one of the remaining endings, knowing that there were 2 left, and at the same time began a new file for the sake of the 3rd ending. We decided that whichever ending was objectively easier would be done on the original file in New Game Plus 1, whereas the harder one would be done with the new character in base New Game. Work smart, not hard. We still did not want to use any sort of help, but would reassess if we still did not have all of the trophies at the end of both of these playthroughs. Once everything was agreed upon, we upgraded our saw cleaver to max level and got our first trophy in this final stretch, and took back to the streets of Central Yharnam in the original save file. Over the span of the next few weeks, when Former was able to come over, we retraced our steps from the first playthrough. And with the exception of a few hiccups here and there, we mostly got through the previously defeated bosses with relative ease. When Former wasn't available, I was taking on the fresh save file on my own, readopting my grind goblin tactic, taking out most of the bosses independently, with a few outliers who I just couldn't quite handle myself yet. We were also trying to do a bit of a better job exploring the areas in the entirety, trying to find anything that we may have missed the first time through. And sure enough, once we reached JoannaVu, we found the first relevant missing piece, the upper cathedral key. We found our way back to that door. We were having a hard time remembering where it was at first, and we started our exploration of the upper cathedral ward. We struggled a bit at first. We were back in unfamiliar territory again after getting pretty comfortable with already explored areas. And it was a map that could give you quite the run for your money, with never before seen, at least by us, celestial larvae that could frenzy you, hard-hitting scourge beasts, and way more brain suckers than we were comfortable with. But in due time, we got to the brain sucker holding the orphanage key, and we opened the door, opened the shortcut gate, and continued on to the celestial emissary fight. On the 26th of June, the fight was over. We defeated the celestial emissary on the first try. It was indisputably and without question the most pitiful excuse for a fight that we had experienced. We killed the poor, pitiful bastard so quickly that it only lasted a few seconds in its second stage, the transformed state. Feeling very underwhelmed and being completely ignorant to the messages around the window telling about a certain secret path, we returned to the dream. We figured we were done there. From there, we went ahead and covered the rest of what we had already gone through in the previous playthrough. And in our confusion over why we just weren't getting any other trophies, we decided to start going through the Chalice dungeons again. We went through as many of them as we were able to, even backtracking to get resources that we needed. But to be quite honest, we fucking hated it. The dungeons were really pissing us off and stressing us out. At that time, the dungeons were our least favorite part of the entire game that we had experienced, and it was not even a close contest. We tried to trudge on, but eventually we just couldn't stomach the Chalice dungeons any longer. We switched over to the fresh save file and worked on getting caught up in preparation for the 2 remaining endings that we still had to get. While playing catch-up, we saw the note in the lecture building that said 3 third chords, and that was how we figured out the 3rd ending. We had gotten the chord from the abandoned old workshop. We had explored Yosefka's clinic better, conveniently after defeating Rom, and gotten the chord from Yosefka's imposter, and we remembered that we would be getting another 1/3 of the chord after killing Murgo's wet nurse. With all 3 chords in our inventory, we used them all and initiated Gehrman's fight. This was in the new game file. We figured that, seeing as we would have to fight Gehrman, that it would be better to do it in the easier file. So we defeated him, we watched the cutscene, and it was confirmed that we were correct in what we had guessed. The fight with Moon Presence began, and on the 5th of July, after only 2 attempts, the Moon Presence fell. We ascended and were reborn as an infant Great One. We promptly skipped through the credits, got to the first lamp, went back to the dream, and switched over to the original character file. Once we were loaded in, we went to Gehrman and we submitted to him, being freed from the dream and getting the good ending trophy, 5 minutes after getting the true endings trophy. We took stock of our trophies that we still had to get, and were very disappointed to see that we were still missing 11 out of the 40 total in both the main game and the DLC. We still had over 1/4 of the trophies to get. We also realized at that moment that in our excitement, we had completely neglected the DLC throughout the last 2 playthroughs, like idiots. We decided that, seeing as we had gone through the game as much as we were able to on nothing more than our own wit, it was now acceptable to use other resources to get the last of the trophies. We did, however, agree that we still wanted to try to do as much as we could without help. But at least now it was an option that we were willing to accept. We loaded back into the newer character. Seeing as New Game Plus 1 we were certain was going to be a lot easier to handle than New Game Plus 2. And the hunt began again. Side note, before you ask why we did it this way rather than just starting a new game, our thought process was that it would be better because the weapon is already maxed out. So we wouldn't be starting with a +0 weapon. We figured it would help us in the end. By this point, we knew Central Yharnam and the rest of the early game areas like the backs of our hands. We were getting through most of the bosses in one attempt, with a few exceptions taking only 2 or 3 tries altogether. We got through almost everyone, leaving only the endgame bosses, and decided to look up a list of all the different spawn points at each of the gravestones to see what exactly we were missing. The only spawn point we saw that we did not have was called Altar of Despair, which was tucked between the Lumenflower Gardens lamp and the Old Yharnam lamp. So we first decided to really scrub the path between Cathedral Ward and Old Yharnam to see if maybe we had missed a secret path or something. We found nothing. So, using deductive reasoning, we established that there must be something in Upper Cathedral that we missed. So we went through the entire map, searching high and low. Nothing. So we went back to the Lumenflower Gardens, feeling like we were going to once again leave empty-handed. That's when we noticed a suspicious amount of notes on the ground surrounding the lamp and right along the window. As we started to read them, there were a lot of spectral forms, so to speak, pointing towards the window. Thinking that we were about to be tricked, because by this point we had seen a lot of notes that were falsely talking about hidden paths, we searched around the rest of the map to see if there was anything that we hadn't found yet, like a door or some sort of pathway. But we found nothing. So finally, we gave in. We went to the window and smacked it, quite possibly out of sheer frustration at this point rather than actually thinking that anything would come of it, and the window fucking broke. We proceeded to go through the 5 stages of grief in rapid succession, then swallowed our feelings and went through the window and followed the path. We took out our anger on the Celestial Emissaries, went down the elevator, killed the larvae, and entered the arena. No health bar popped up, but we saw this weird thing, this monstrosity at the end of the map. We went up to her, gave her a nice little poke, and the secret boss fight was initiated. And I can tell you this, she felt like a secret late game boss. Again, we didn't have the Bowblade, essentially Abridus' worst nightmare, so we were relying strictly on close combat. It took us numerous attempts, but on the 7th of July, we beat her. We got the trophy for beating her, got the Is Chalice, and got the trophy for getting the Is Chalice. We lit the lamp, went back to the dream, and checked out all of the gravestones to make sure that we were caught up and not missing anything. The only one we hadn't gotten yet was Wet Nurse's Linarium, so we knew we were finally up to date and had gotten everyone else in the main game. Satisfied, we moved on to the DLC. It took us a while to get through and reach Ludwig, as this was by far our least touched area aside from the Chalice dungeons that we hadn't done yet. But we got caught up, we killed Ludwig, we took out the 2 church hunters, lit the research hall lamp, and backtracked to get Lawrence's skull. And yes, we did have to look that up. We got the skull, we got the secret church cannon because might as well, and we went back to the hunter's nightmare lamp. We went up the stairs into the Nightmare Grand Cathedral, avoiding the Nightmare Executioner like the plague, and initiated the cutscene. The fight began, and we were promptly humbled. We gave him a few more attempts, but we decided that we were better off just going a different way for now. So, back to the research hall, we went back to the lamp and started going through the map. We had a complete bitch of a time. We were not dying as much as the first time we tried, but we were still very much so getting lost. Eventually, after a substantial amount of time trying, We gave in and we looked up a walkthrough because we were tired of it and we just wanted to know where we had to go to get the fuck out of this area. Eventually we got there, we got to the Living Failures fight, and after a few tries, they were beaten on the 12th of July. So we pressed on, finding Lady Maria sitting dead in her chair. We inspected her, got the hell scared out of us, and the fight began. Roughly 20 minutes later, and with a handful of tries, Lady Maria was defeated as well. So we held up the Celestial Dial and opened the pathway to the final area. Determined, we followed the path and lit the lamp. We charged forth, killing all of the enemies, met our newly acquired most terrifying enemy, the whale shark, knocked down the shortcut ladder, and went down the well in the middle of the plaza. Hearing the winter lanterns singing, we stopped partway down the ladder, and we looked around, seeing another whale shark hanging from the ceiling and appearing to look directly at us with a certain hunger in his eyes. We thought it in our best interest to change course and instead try to get to the next lamp. After getting our shit rocked several times on the path, we decided to just blast through that stretch, not hitting the enemies throwing harpoons at us, or the weird fish dogs, ignoring the priest and his curses, and running for dear life past the whale shark. We reached the lighthouse hut lamp, crossed the bridge, got ambushed by a complete bastard who was glowing red, and eventually got to the shortcut door in the cave back to the lamp. We opened it, we turned back into the cave, went down the ladder, went to the next cave, got ambushed again by the same red bastard, and we kept running, searching for the next path, and then we got killed by the priest's curse. So we tried again, we used the shortcut, went back on track, and eventually found where we needed to drop off. Not noticing the lever that we could pull to gain access to arguably one of the most valuable shortcuts in the whole game, we took the wrong path, because of course we did, and we were killed by the winter lanterns, making us go through the later part of the map again. We got back on track, we dropped off the ledge, saw the lever this time, thank fuck, pulled it and unlocked the shortcut. Went back down, made the mistake of running towards the winter lanterns again, and narrowly escaping another death. And a bit shy after lighting the lamp, we stood at the door of the orphan's fight. By this point, we had certainly caught wind of the orphan. Specifically that, at least at that time, he was widely considered to be the hardest boss in all of the FromSoft games. We had heard about his complex AI and knew that he could reassess the situation and change tactics every 30 seconds. We had heard about he had no real weaknesses, unlike most of the other bosses in the game. And we were tired. We were so tired. But our minds were made up. The orphan would be killed that night. So we entered the coast, and the cutscene played. The fight began, and we realized just how true all of what we heard was. The orphan was obliterating our character, and we died over and over and over again. But we were not going to give in. We had made a commitment to beat this bastard tonight, and that was exactly what we were going to do. And this story that I am about to share was by far my proudest moment in the game up to this point. Throughout our entire playthrough, I had certainly done my part to the best of my ability, but I will admit, Former was the main contributor in the way of boss fights. This was because the two of us had very different styles of combat. I was far more cautious, genuinely to a fault, and they were way more aggressive, which was exactly what Bloodborne really encouraged. High risk, high reward. So more times than not, I would psych myself out in a fight, trying to evade and heal way more times than I should have. As a result, I would die. Meanwhile, Former would completely balls to the wall it and kill most of the bosses, even if by the skin of their teeth. But this fight was different. Former had made several attempts and died every time. So I took the controller and I passed through the fog. The fight was intense, but I was not giving up. I was dodging and weaving and going in for hits when the time felt right. I got Orphan down to where he transformed into his second phase, something that we had only seen a few times at this point out of many. I persisted and held true to my technique. I was on my last leg, I had used all of my blood vials, and even used Yosefka's blood vial, but something was smiling upon me that day. I delivered the final blow, and then, 2.5 hours after initiating the first attempt, the orphan fell to his knees and took his final breath. This time, I was the victor. I was the one who killed the orphan of cause. And I wore that victory with pride from there on out. After a short celebration of that victory, we decided to change paths and try to get the Chalice dungeons out of the way and over and done with. We knew that there were 2 things in particular that we specifically needed to get there. The Beast Claw, which was in the Ailing Loran dungeon, and Queen Yarnum, the final boss of the Thumeru Isle. We had a long way to go. Up to this point, we had still only done the Thumeru, the Central Thumeru, the Hintertomb, and the Lower Thumeru dungeons. 4 out of 10 of the dungeons. So, we started with Ailing Loran. We got any missing ritual material that we needed from the Insight Bath, performed the ritual, and got through it fairly easily, with Former taking the brunt of it because of the Labyrinth Madmen. When we completed that dungeon, including getting the Beast Claw, we backtracked to the Lower Hintertomb, not knowing at that time that it was not a required dungeon to reach our goal. But we did get through it with much frustration, granted, though we had no idea what we were in for following that. Next we went to the Defiled Chalice, and we immediately noticed that our health bar was halved. For the sake of time, let's just say that this was a several-day affair. We were cursing and spitting the whole way through, but eventually, I don't know how, but we got to the end and we got the Thumeru Isle Chalice. We disregarded the remaining 2 dungeons that we hadn't touched on yet, the Lower Loran and the Is, and we beelined into the Isle. With several attempts, some burnout avoidant breaks, and unbridled hatred bubbling in our bloodstreams, we fought tooth and nail to get through it. We struggled greatly with the Queen, not even because she herself was a hard boss, but because we just were not catching on to the fact that we kept getting trapped when Murgo started to cry. But after a while, we finally caught on, and anytime the crying began, we backed away. This was the only thing really holding us back, and on the 29th of July, we defeated Queen Yarnum. And it was at that moment that we vowed to never step foot into a Chalice dungeon ever again. Palpable irony. We took a day off to regroup. We were starting to feel the burnout again, but we knew that we were so damn close to getting the Platinum Trophy. We took note of specifically what we still needed in the way of trophies. We only had a few left. One of them was combat related, and that was Lawrence, who we knew we still needed to level up a bit more to be able to take on. Aside from that, all we had left were collecting all of the weapons, both in the main game and the DLC, as they were separate trophies, collecting all of the hunter tools, and the Platinum Trophy itself. So we elected to kill 3 birds with 1 stone and run through the main game to collect the weapons and tools, while also grinding to get enough blood echoes to level up to take on Lawrence. We picked up the last weapon in the game and got the trophy on the 1st of August, just after midnight. We kept going through rounds of echo farming, and we were really struggling to find the rest of the hunter tools. Eventually, we felt we had leveled up enough, and we wanted to just rip the band-aid off and take on Lawrence. This was a several-hour affair because of the fact that we were in New Game +1, and there is a substantial difficulty spice for Lawrence in particular, just from the base game to New Game Plus 1. But regardless, we beat him that same evening, and we knew that it was all downhill from there. But sadly, there were some matters at hand outside of Yharnam in the real world, so we had to take a few weeks off. But as soon as all the situations were sorted and we were able to hop back in, we did. On the 22nd of August, we finally got the last hunter tool that we were missing. We got that trophy, as well as the platinum trophy. Now, we only had one trophy left to get, and that was the old hunter's essence, obtained by acquiring all of the old hunter weapons. We looked up a checklist to see what exactly we needed to get. We looked up where to find it, and we got to work. Finally, at 22:57, 10:57 p.m., on the 22nd of August, 2017, we got the Old Hunter's Essence trophy. Our journey had finally reached its end. Altogether, from the day that we first installed Bloodborne to the day that we got our final trophy, not taking into account the breaks that we had to take along the way, we completed everything in 1 year, 8 months, 30 days. That moment when we got the last trophy was cathartic. We felt truly victorious. In a way, it was almost like a spiritual enlightenment of sorts. I had completed video games in my time, and of course it always feels good to beat a game. But this was another stratosphere. Nothing could hold a candle to this feeling. And honestly, even all these years later, that sense of accomplishment still has not really been matched for me. Not by other games, or by anything else. So once all was said and done, and the trophies had all been collected, I chose to take some time away from the game. Former and I had gone through 4 playthroughs, and it seemed like it was time to focus on something else for a while. From time to time, I would still come back in very short stints, but those generally didn't last more than maybe a few days at a time, and were pretty infrequent. It was somewhere in the later half of 2018 that I started to feel drawn back to Yharnam. I missed the adrenaline, the excitement that I felt when I played the game. So I decided that I wanted to start playing the game from a fresh new character, and I wanted to do it on my own. I didn't want to rely on someone else to help when I wasn't getting the hang of something. So I made a new character, and the hunt, after a year-long break, began once more. I was actually surprised by how much I still remembered. The controls came back to me pretty instantly, almost like a reflex. I knew exactly where to go on the map to get where I needed to. I even remembered some specific item placements like the Madman's Knowledge and Bloodstone Shards. Very important things when you're starting a new character. I experimented a bit with other weapons aside from the Saw Cleaver, which had been the only weapon that Former and I really used aside from just testing out a few others. It had honestly carried us all the way through all of our old playthroughs. And I was feeling more comfortable than ever with the earlier boss fights, honestly, most of which I was getting on the first try. I believe the first one I actually died to was the Shadow of Yharnam, and for that fight, I seem to remember I was slightly underleveled for it anyway. Obviously, as the game progressed, I started to struggle a bit more, as you're supposed to, but that was honestly nothing that some good old grinding couldn't fix. I also started to experiment a little bit with cooperative play, particularly in the DLC. I started ringing the beckoning bell outside of the boss fog for a few of them, and got very fortunate sometimes to be connected with somebody. This was before I knew about the password system or about any of the online groups where people will make posts to ask for help. So any connections that I got were by sheer luck. I remember that I really enjoyed this aspect of the game. It added a lot more fun to me. So, as I started getting better at the game than ever before, I started to ring the small resonant bell instead. I would stand outside of bosses that I already beat, and I would try to help other people. I saw it as a bit of a win-win because I could help someone who needed an extra set of hands, and it would also give me even more practice so that I could improve my techniques even further without having to start another new game cycle. I also learned about some pretty cool things that you could do in the game, like ways to quickly max out your character with an old exploit that had been patched already in the game. So I actually, after a while, deleted my save files and went through the long and arduous process of doing that exploit, and I made a maxed out character specifically to help people, something that I would do many more times to come. I continued all of this semi-regularly through the later half of 2019. I had a lot of other things going on at that time, both good and bad, so I didn't really have the time or, the ability to commit to the game for a fairly long while. I didn't come back to the game again until the very start of 2022. At this point, I was out of work, and I had pretty much honestly become a bit of a shut-in with all the time in the world, and everything else was stale and boring to me at that point. So it felt like the perfect time to get back into the swing of Bloodborne once again. And sure enough, I still remembered essentially all of it like it was yesterday, even after all that time. I wanted to make sure that I was still good at the game, so I made a new character, unlocked all of the areas, and beat all of the bosses in the base game and DLC. Once I was confident in myself once again, I decided to look for some sort of resource to find people who needed help. And that's when I learned about the Hunter's Bell subreddit. I made an account, I joined the subreddit, and started responding to posts from people asking for help with bosses. I would put in whatever password they gave me, got to the lamp or fog wherever they said to meet them. I would ring the small resonant bell and be connected with someone who could be anywhere else around the world. We would take out the boss, sometimes first try, sometimes several tries in, and then I would ask if they wanted more help with the next boss or the next area. And sometimes I would even add some people as friends on PSN who I particularly meshed well with, just in case we ever wanted to team up again, either for a full playthrough or just to help each other. And that's how I met Brad. We started playing together in March of 2022. I believe the first fight, if I remember correctly, was the Witch of Hemwick. And we very quickly became close friends. We decided to party up and voice chat while we were playing, and we hit it off very well. And now, a few years later, we still play together a lot of the time, as I've mentioned in several of my previous videos. And at this point, honestly, I see him as one of my dearest friends of all time. It really is amazing, how easy it is to connect to somebody who lives hours, sometimes even days, away from you, all over a video game. This is one of the instances where I feel that modern technology can really be a beautiful thing, but that's a conversation for another time. For a fair amount of time, my only stipulation for helping people online was that I did not want to do the dungeons. I was still very disinterested in them on a good day, and outright resentful towards them on a bad day, just because of how difficult they were to get through before. But after a while, the subreddit was starting to fizzle out a bit. There weren't really as many people looking for help, and those that were all wanted help with the dungeons because that's all they had left to do. So eventually I gave in. I went through all of the fixed dungeons, cursing and spitting and scowling the whole way through until I had everything unlocked. I made sure to get the short route ritual chalice so that I wouldn't have to keep redoing the layers of various dungeons just to help someone, and I used it to help whoever needed it. Then, over time, eventually I started to get a bit more desensitized to the dungeons, by which I specifically mean I still didn't really enjoy them, but I didn't mind them as much because I was getting more used to them. At that point, I had accumulated over 2,000 hours in the game, and the rest of the areas were starting to get a bit boring to me anyway. Not saying that I'm tired of the game, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just, if you go through the same thing over and over and over again, eventually it becomes just not very interesting. Unbeknownst to me at the time, this was actually a very good thing. I started to look into glyphs that I could go to improve my stats. Sometimes it was for tier 3 runes, sometimes it was for different weapon variants like the uncanny or lost variants, sometimes it was for stronger blood gems, a lot of the time in fact. And another friend who I had also met on Reddit, named Rex, he and I even went through some gem farming runs together, like a lot of gem farming runs, and after a while, Brad and I started doing some root chalice diving ourselves. We quickly learned just how great the root chalices can be. With 2,300 different possible dungeon layouts, the possibilities are nearly endless. And on top of that, there have been so many times when we experienced really strange or really interesting or outright hilarious things happen. Rare enemy encounters, roaming bosses, strange layouts, glitches galore. Something that, for a very long time, I have found very interesting in games. I just think glitches are fascinating. As Brad and I started to really get into our chalice dives, I also joined the Tomb Prospectors subreddit, just to try and learn about different possibilities that are hiding in the labyrinth walls. Some other people in that subreddit have found amazing things, and I've grown honestly very partial to reading what all they've uncovered and all the information that they can offer. I honestly at this point cannot get enough of it. And suffice it to say, all of this has led to where we are right now on this channel. I fell so in love with the root chalices and all that can happen in them that I wanted to do it even more than Brad or Rex did. So I decided to just do it myself when they couldn't or didn't want to. And I figured, if I'm going to have fun with this, why not record it and share it for other people who find it interesting or fun too? And, as they say, the rest is history.